Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 10th CAISPN call. I'm Ethan Chu of the California International Spaceports Network. Tonight we're going to have a presentation by Integrated Space Analytics on the Integrated Space Plan, the next generation of the strategic roadmap for humanity going into space. With me tonight are Mr. Jay Wittner, the CEO of Integrated Space Analytics, Mr. Ron Jones, the space architect of the original and the new Integrated Space Plan, and Mr. Gary Bickford, the CTO of Integrated Space Analytics. Gentlemen, if you may introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Jay Wittner.
Ron Jones.
Gary Bickford.
All right, gentlemen, if we may begin the your presentation, starting with you, Mr. Wittner.
Okay, let me get my screen share going here. Can you see the share, Ethan?
All right, share is good. I can see you.
Excellent. So our organization is called Integrated Space Analytics. We're only about 2 years old, and we already went through most of our team, but we do have a fourth member of the team who is not with us today, Stephen Jorgenson. He's our CFO. If any of you want to get in touch with us, after the presentation today, at any point in the future, my contact information is here for you, and I'll be repeating it at the very end of the presentation as well. But feel free to drop me an email if you wish at j.wittner@thespaceplan.com. So while we do have plans to do more things in the future than the Integrated Space Plan, that is our beginning and our core product and service right now is the Integrated Space Plan. So that's what we'll be primarily talking about tonight. And it's been interesting in the space environment that some folks aren't really too sure that we need to have a big plan about what we should do in space. So I thought I would start with some of those issues. So in the beginning of our space adventure, there weren't that many players. There was really the United States and the Soviet Union. And the idea of substantive cooperation between the United States and Russia in those days would have been somewhat laughable. We were more worried about fighting with each other than cooperating. So at that time, there wasn't really much need for an integrated plan for everybody to look at because everybody was on their own page, the two players at that time. After many years have passed, by the late 80s, we had a lessening of the tensions. The Cold War somewhat came to an end. And what we saw is that opened the door to more cooperative activities between the United States and Russia. And the symbol of that, really, the primary activity was the International Space Station. But still, it was a very small group, two players really working together primarily. By the time the space station actually, the deal was inked and things were starting to happen there were now a decent number of different players involved in the space arena. We had 15 countries signed on for the ISS, and we had some other exciting things. Blue Origin was founded. Dennis Tito flew in space. SpaceX was founded, and we had China launched astronauts into orbit. So now there were multiple players engaged in various related activities in space, which brings us up to today. What do things look like now? Well, now there's about 1,400 participants, and there's a truly exciting amount of money that's being invested annually in our space adventures, over $300 billion a year. There's all these different players from all these different categories of organizations in the lower right, but there's not a central plan. And that is the area that we're trying to address. So why is a plan needed? We settled the United States without a plan. Why do we need a plan to settle space, to explore space? Well, when we settled the United States, you could go out and catch fish, make your lunch. You could plant food, you could grow crops, and If you look at these people, none of them are wearing a spacesuit. They don't need one. It was a much easier challenge what we faced when we decided to settle the United States. And if we want to settle space with no plan, maybe we could do it, but it's going to be a lot harder and take a lot longer. I don't think any of us really want to wait thousands of years for us to settle space. We'd like to do it in a more efficient manner. So whenever time matters, when money matters, when lives matter, you've got to have planning to move things forward in a rapid, efficient way. And I just picked two examples here. The Empire State Building. It was the tallest building in the world for 40 years. It was built in about 1 year. In that case, the planning was bunches of blueprints, primarily. In the Normandy invasion, activities from 5 different nations, 7,000 ships, 12,000 planes, and over 160,000 troops were landed on the first day of that activity. This is very intense planning when you want to do something that's large and complex. And that's the situation that we're faced with today. So how has the planning been going? How have we been doing in terms of establishing plans, implementing the plans, following them through, and so forth? Well, it's a bit embarrassing, but our results have been quite spotty in terms of what's actually occurred. We seem to have this pattern of coming up with interesting visions, spending billions and billions of dollars, and then canceling everything. And the situation seems to be one that it's hard to imagine really getting out of as long as the planning is being done where it's being done now. If things come out of the White House, they're inherently political. The same thing happens with Congress. It's just right there on the label. NASA certainly has the people to plan and execute a plan, but they're being micromanaged and controlled by presidents and Congress. And the members of Congress, and the vast majority of them anyway, care more about what district the money is spent in than what the program is. So the whole structural situation is quite difficult to move forward in a rational, step-by-step fashion to actually accomplish our objectives in space. So who does that leave? Well, the aerospace giants. There's certainly a possibility. There's really nothing in terms of space that Boeing can't plan and figure out and execute, or Lockheed Martin as well. But whatever they do, they'd appear to be acting in their own self-interest because of their role in the industry and their vast capacities. Anything substantive that we do in space, they're going to be a part of, so it would be unseemly for them to make the big plan. So who does that leave? Well, we concluded that the space advocacy community, the National Space Society, Planetary Society, affiliated organizations, us, that's who's left to figure this out. And we decided that we would undertake this challenge and that we would accept it. And that's the goal of integrated space analytics, is to try to plan this thing out. So we realized early on, well, the first thing that we did is we put together the company with one of our key members, Ron Jones, who is the original inventor of the integrated space plan. And the first thing we realized is we would need some money to implement this plan. Fortunately, we didn't need a lot to get started. But we did a Kickstarter campaign to get ourselves started. We had a lot of nice support. Over 400 backers from 22 different countries came together and provided enough money for us to stand up a company and do the legal stuff and get things underway. This happened in the summer of 2013. I'm sorry, 2014, pardon me. I would want to thank the different organizations that helped us make all this happen. Without the support of these folks, we wouldn't be where we are. So I just want to spend a moment to thank all of them, especially 212 Box and Into Mystery, who not only gave us a huge amount of financial support, but also helped us with the actual design. they helped us make the Integrated Space Plan beautiful, is really what they did. So after the Kickstarter, we dove into research. There was a huge amount of research that we needed to do to get everything up to date, figure out what was going on. Although all of us, had interest in space before we started, certainly, but there was a lot of research that happened. And we had the last version of the Integrated Space Plan from roughly 20 years ago as a starting point. We did the first early steps of drafting the plan using spreadsheets because the Integrated Space Plan has a format of columns in it. So spreadsheets was an easy way to begin. And interestingly enough, with the ISDC opening in Puerto Rico in 2 weeks, that was where we went for our big summit meeting when we were putting this together in person. And after we had sort of the rough draft in terms of content, we went through literally dozens of drafts with the 2-in-2 box design firm out in New York to try to make everything gorgeous. The actual posters were printed and shipped in mid-2015. Thank God. It was a Herculean task to get them done, printed, and sent out all over the world. So what does the thing look like? Here it is, the new improved Integrated Space Plan. There's not time in this call to go over every aspect of the new plan. I'll hit a few highlights, and maybe people will want to talk about it more in the discussion period later on. Fundamentally, what we're looking at is the most detailed, very long-term projection of space that exists. So as far as we know, there isn't anybody that's done anything longer-term, more detailed than this. So what we've accomplished is we've updated all the content because the prior edition was 20 years old, so naturally a lot of the content was out of date. We transitioned from black and white to full color, which gave us a lot of benefits in terms of different ways to portray the information. It's a very large poster, much larger than normal, 30 inches wide by 48 inches high. We also have a giant version that I think is roughly 4 feet wide by 7 feet tall, although I'd have to look up the exact dimensions. It's more for conferences or corporate use than personal use. The old ISP had about 400 elements in it, these little colored boxes that you see in the whole central portion. We now have about 500 boxes, so there's significant more data than had been in the past. The boxes are categorized by 9 different types. So each column contains boxes of a different type. For example, there's like a column about Earth to orbit launch vehicles. There's a column about reusable in-space transportation. So you can tell when something is going to happen by looking at where it is vertically in the chart and what type of thing it is by looking at what column it is located in. Also, the colors of the boxes, there's clues into what orbit the different things are located in. That's the different shades of blue. We also highlighted items that were urgent and unfunded or underfunded. We thought that was very important, so we gave them their own color so that if you had the good luck to be meeting with a congressional staffer or something, that you could easily point out and they could see things that really needed attention. And in terms of introducing new people to the whole space arena that we're also interested in, it's very difficult to pull a 500-page book off your shelf and sit down with them because they're scared to death that you're going to make them look at it. It's too much stuff. So the ISP is a very complex thing to look at, but it's one page that people can get their arms around. So it's a very good educational tool. Now, when Ron first invented the ISP back in the day, there wasn't an internet, so the ISP was never on the internet. So Gary Bickford, our partner Gary Bickford, has brought the ISP to the internet, which is a whole new thing because in the old days, the only people that would know about the Integrated Space Plan basically were people that were already in the loop enough to go to a space conference. Very few people just would come across this day-to-day life. So in this part of our website, there's the actual ISP with all these elements that you see, the boxes. And anybody that goes on our site can click on a box, and they can have an extra window pop up. So the example here I chose was Falcon Heavy. So if you see the yellow arrows, that's like the Falcon Heavy box on the main plan. If they click on that box, a new window pops up that has, some text information about Falcon Heavy, links to Falcon Heavy, a video about Falcon Heavy. And in the future, in the near future, we'll be converting this over to like an engineering quad chart kind of a format. That's something that right now is underway to figure out the different formats, different categories of elements to quad charts out. We wanted to have some other information on our website besides the integrated space plan itself. So we thought that we would do, one of the things was books. So there's a listing of hundreds of the best space books is on our site. So you can look through the list. If you click on an item that's on the list, an extra window pops up with a sentence or two description about the book and the rating, the Goodreads assigned to the book, and so forth. This is a great way to get people more interested in space that haven't really started yet, to tell our story through some of the good fictional tools that are out there. We did a similar thing with space movies. Hundreds of space movies have been referenced in the site, and when you click on them, there's extra information appears, just like before. We want to do more with what we've done so far. We'd like to have some trailers populating the movie page and little mini descriptions like on the books. So that's a little bit of a work in progress. We noticed that while there are some places online where you can find out what space conferences are going to happen in the next month or two, there didn't seem to be a good place that was sort of centralized for the longer term. So we're trying to run out space conferences up to roughly a year ahead. Once again, the same format, a list of items that if you click on them, you can get more information. This pop-up box is about the ISDC because we're almost there, just 10 days away or something now. So people can decide, where it is, what it's about, how much it costs, links to the conference, and so on. And we think that that's a good way to build the space community to let people know where the conferences are, when they're going to happen. On sort of the on the detail side, the administrivia of everything, we did put together a store online with shopping cart and all that kind of stuff. People can buy with credit cards, and it's all automated. We've retained a fulfillment company, so when an order comes in, this company, pulls up a poster and sends it out to the person and makes sure they get it on a timely basis. And we've also established some social media presence for integrated space analytics to start getting the word out there. We've had some good luck so far with outreach. We've gotten some good media coverage. We were in Wired, Fast Company, and different places online that were really helpful to us with the activities so far. We have over 500 people already that like what we're doing. We have email addresses, so we're able to communicate with them and get them into the fold a little bit moving forward. Already over 25,000 people have been to our website, so people are getting exposed to the integrated space plan in pretty large numbers compared to the past. We've done a little bit of sponsorship. We're sponsoring the space show, and we are a co-sponsor of the upcoming National Space Society ISDC conference. My partner Gary Bickford will talk about some of the things that we're doing in the future, but we do have a couple of things that are sort of right around the corner almost that I want to just touch on first. In the same way that we have an area on our website for conferences, we've already been doing the research to open up a new page about grants and scholarships that we think will be of great interest to small startups, to certainly college students and other folks. So we think that that'll be a nice resource that, and I'm not sure if there's anybody so far that's been doing that, that's aggregating this type of material from different sources. Also, a near thing that we want to do in the near future is that we want to have a Zoom capability that is enhanced when you go to look at the integrated space plan on our website, that you sort of zoom in on what you want to look at, center that in your screen, and then you can zoom in and everything gets bigger. But what will happen in the future is as you zoom in, additional blocks will appear because you've said sort of you want to zoom in and see the nitty-gritty of all the different things about building a lunar base. So extra boxes will appear with more steps, more smaller steps, I guess, higher granularity of the information about building a base on the moon, or you might want to zoom in on Mars or some other location or launch vehicles or whatever. So that is a quick overview of where we have come so far. But now we want to have our partner Ron Jones take us to the original birth, the very beginnings of the Integrated Space Plan 25 years ago, because without Ron's flash of insight, none of this would have ever happened. So I'll turn off my screen share, and Ron, you can take over.
Gentlemen, when we transition presenters, Jay, may you please mute your microphone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Ron, please unmute your microphone. Click on the microphone symbol at the top of the Google Hangout window. Okay, audio good.
Can you see the slideshow?
Okay, screen is on. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is going to be a bit of a history lesson for you younger guys. For you older guys, you've heard it all before. So what is the Integrated Space Plan? Jay touched upon a number of these things, but basically it was the first attempt to capture a systematic overview of the entire space program. The idea was to pull together all of the types of emerging technologies, the missions, the goals, and all the major milestones, put it in one spot so you can kind of see how it emerged over time. So you had to phase things in chronologically. Now, it was never meant to be a specific plan on how to get from A to B. The ISP is really a compilation of opportunities. There's no single path, we're not trying to identify single paths to get something done. But there are many paths to get to the moon, to get back to Mars, to build a solar power satellite. We don't know how it's eventually gonna happen, but we can put all the elements, make sure all the elements are out there, or at least the ones that eventually materialize. We can get a pretty good idea on how it's all going to roll out. The beauty of the Integrated Space Plan was its long-range scope enables you to actually view a particular program in a context that didn't exist before. So, it's kind of unique in that way. So you can see on a particular mission how it fits into a broader picture, how much it's really required if you have to prioritize things. And the beauty of the ISP is that it's really a great tool to educate interested parties, especially bureaucrats like in Congress and NASA and space professionals. And it has been used since day one. I'll touch upon that in a future slide here. Been used quite a bit up on the Hill. Next slide. So the ISP was actually born in Hawaii way back in '86. But I guess I got to start the story a little before that. My earliest memory in life was my dad taking me outside at night and showing me Sputnik flyover. And I was about 4 years old. That had a major impact on my life. And the only other major thing going on in my childhood was the Vietnam War. And when I thought about space and war, I mean, it was no contest. The space really kind of captivated my attention. So I spent most of my early years forming space groups in California. And as a consequence, meeting all these radical thinkers, free thinkers in California, of which I guess I was probably one of them, we saw the space shuttle as the thing that was going to, the mechanism to do all the things we wanted to do in space. In the '70s, we also saw the birth of the space colony, or space settlement movement. Jerry O'Neill's ideas were coming out, and we thought the space shuttle was going to be the vehicle that lowered costs enough so that we can develop things like space settlements. That was what really got us all into it at an early age. Was that whole idea of eventually building space settlements, not going to Mars. So as a stepping stone, though, we saw the space shuttle external tank as a major element to help build up infrastructure in low Earth orbit. So I became, very well versed on uses of the shuttle external tank in orbit. And then, lo and behold, I had the opportunity to go work on the space shuttle. I applied for a job down at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and Martin Marietta, builder of the space of the external tank, hired me. I worked shuttle program requirements down there. Became part of the giant standing army that operated the shuttles. But I worked out of California at Vandenberg Air Force Base, so it was a little different operation out there. It was the Air Force shuttle. I actually worked program requirements for the first classified payload called Teal Ruby. I don't know how many of you guys remember that one, but at the time, well, you shouldn't know too much about it because it was highly classified. But it's now in a museum somewhere. But back then, in my late 20s, I was working with all these young guys my age at Vandenberg, and none of them had any idea how what we were doing at Vandenberg fit into a bigger picture of the space program. I was, wanting to work on the shuttle to help someday build space colonies, and these guys didn't understand what we were doing out there in Central California. So then, unfortunately, Challenger exploded, and everything came to a screeching halt. And within a few months, we were all laid off, about 3,000 of us at Vandenberg. And so as I was laying out on that very beach that you see pictured there in that slide, up in North Oahu, I came out I was laying down, I was drinking a beer, and thinking about how to portray all the vast elements of the space program. And I came up with the basic framework for the integrated space plan. So some months later, when I got back to California, got hired by Rockwell, I started working it. So it took a little while, but I got hired by Rockwell International to go work on the replacement for the Challenger, the Endeavour. I actually worked in the mission control room at Rockwell on the return to flight STS-26. And it was about that time frame the Macintosh entered the workforce, and I had been drawing lines on a pad of paper, kind of sketching out the framework of the integrated space plan. Then the Mac came about, and after about 30 minutes of instruction, I learned how to do circles and squares on a Mac, and it only took about 18 months to get a final product, but the integrated space plan was my first ever project on a computer. and it turned out to be quite a massive undertaking. So in the course of all this, because of my work, word got around at Rockwell that I was working on this kind of thing, and I ended up sucked up into the Advanced Projects Group. And then about this time, President Bush, the first President Bush, said, "Oh, he said you wanted to, go back to the moon and on to Mars." He formed something called the Space Exploration Initiative (SCI), and my space plan kind of put a frame to that whole project. So I was part of the Rockwell team working those issues way back in the late 80s, early 90s. I got Rockwell to actually use the integrated space plan as a marketing tool, and they printed up thousands of them. They sent them all around the world, but certainly all around the country and to every NASA center. And so it got a lot of exposure in the community. I didn't actually introduce it to the community in a formal way till '89. It was actually at the 8th Space Development Conference in Chicago, I believe, and that went quite well. I had a lot of early supporters. Some of them are pictured there. Buzz Aldrin became a really important early supporter, as did Burt Rutan and Lori Garver. Because I was living with a lawyer that worked for McDonnell Douglas by happenstance at the time, she made sure I had a copyright on it. And so when I left Rockwell in '93, I actually owned the Integrated Space Plan. Now, I didn't get around to revising it again. It took a few years, but back in '97, I went to work for, earlier than that, I was working for Buzz Aldrin, moved to Washington, D.C., and we started working on, we got drafted to put together a congressional hearing on the future of NASA. So for that, I came up with the last version 4 of the ISP. You can see some that congressional hearing was actually in the Air and Space Museum. It was to date, I think it's the first and only congressional hearing that was actually in the Air and Space Museum. Anyway, moving on. So, it took 18 months to pull together all the elements, and of course I had to draw upon many years of thinking about it. But there was still a lot of stuff that I just didn't see way back then. And the biggest thing we never saw coming was, we had this beautiful thing called a space shuttle, but we didn't see the huge cost to operate it. And when I worked at Vandenberg and at Rockwell, I was part of that problem. I was part of the standing army, keeping that thing working, and it was a major task. We never saw the early shuttle termination and the unintended consequences from that, and I'll touch upon that in a few slides. Also during the heady Apollo days, we were all charged up. We landed on the moon. These were, that was an exciting time to be alive and be into the space program. I think I was 16 when we landed on the moon. And, when you're 16, I was in high school, getting ready to go to college. I thought I was going to be building a moon base. But I never realized, and I didn't see coming, this whole idea of how risk aversion would inhibit any further boldness within NASA. So that was a major, these are all major constraints that happened that we just had no control over. In later years, I got involved with Buzz Aldrin and promoting a reusable rocket system called Star Booster, and I just was mind-boggled, lobbying on the Hill, talking. We went and talked to Boeing and Lockheed Martin, Northrop, trying to make these guys see the beauty of reusing the first stage. If you just didn't throw away the first stage, you can greatly reduce costs. And Buzz came up with a marvelous idea that meant to reuse the first stage. You don't change the rocket itself. Our concept was to use an existing hardware, a lightweight Atlas III, but just strap a relatively low technology, lightweight airframe around it. And after it burned up, after 5 minutes of flight, just fly it back to the launch pad. It's called Star Booster. Well, aerospace and the big companies didn't want any part of that. They didn't want to reuse those boosters that they were getting 20, 30, 40 million bucks a pop for, So, that kind of came as a big surprise at a young age. And then the whole government reluctance to support commercial space, not only by not developing reusable systems, but by putting government alternatives up against the commercial guys that were trying to start. We were just working against ourselves. Another thing that really affected us and is affecting us today is NASA's failure to advance propulsion technology beyond the space shuttle main engine. Never saw that coming, and now we're trying to duplicate a Russian RD-180, which we should have had that technology 20 years ago, but we just didn't do it. Anyway, a lot of other things have happened also. We never saw the internet, smartphones, 3D printing, all that kind of stuff, but yet those are integral pieces of our thinking today. So it gives us a whole new framework to start thinking about these things. And perhaps the most amazing is we really never saw the billionaire class and those folks getting involved in developing their own space programs. So lots has happened. Lots of things have happened. Now what I did see way back in the day, because of my interest in external tanks, I did see ways that you can start taking tanks to orbit and utilizing all that material for commercial purposes. This was out of a paper that I did with Tom Taylor back in '84, and I was working at Martin Marietta at the time, and so I was able to draw upon a lot of their resources. This originally started out as a Martin, idea. The first 4 or 5 launches was you see it down kind of through the center is a Martin Marietta external tank concept. But I was found myself at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and having some knowledge of the external tank and what you can do with it, and the fact that if you actually rode the tank all the way to orbit, you could bring up a lot more payload, especially if you're trying to get to polar orbit, like the Department of Defense is trying to do, because you didn't need 25,000 pounds of orbital maneuvering system fuel in the back end of the shuttle. So, problem is what do you do with the tank when it's up there? You got this huge mass up there, and if you can't control it in some way, it'll just come down like a bomb over New Mexico or New York. So I had done a lot of research, and there was a guy named Colombo that had come up with a concept for stabilizing a tank using a mass and a cable. And I looked at that and I said, well, that's an interesting idea. And I just, of course, I had access to all the external tank drawings. So I found a way to make it all happen using the aft ET orbiter interface section on the back end of the ET and a cable tether a half kilometer, or I think it was a few kilometers long. And anyway, I came up with the concept to automatically deploy a tank in orbit. So that enabled a whole lot of thinking about architecture and how it could evolve and the types of commercial things you can do. So when you lay things out over time, but this is like really the first integrated space plan you're looking at here. You're able to portray all kinds of different platforms, free flyers, habitats, hotels, momentum reservoir stations, hardened polar orbiting space stations. That what the DoD was looking for a way to back then to look for a way to harden a space station in polar orbit. Well, the external tank was perfect for it. Pressurized hangars. There are all kinds of commercial things, but unfortunately, none of it ever happened. Another thing we didn't foresee way back in the early days. But when you look at what our infrastructure that we have now, there's lots of things, commercial things that we can do, and we're now just beginning to see these things kind of come to fruition. I won't spend a whole lot of time here on this, other than I will mention one, reusable first stages. We're seeing everybody's building those now. Even Lockheed Martin and Boeing are coming out with reusable stages that look an awful lot like the Buzz Aldrin Star Booster you'll see in a minute. But all this page is full of commercial opportunities, and one of the things on the bottom of the page here is a wing sample return vehicle that we couldn't have foreseen a need for this until they quit flying the space shuttle. The space shuttle offered a way to get very sensitive payloads down from orbit in a benign environment where you're only exposing things to 2 or 3 Gs. Well, we don't have that now. All the ballistic reentry capsules that they're using now are going to expose things to 8, 9, 10 Gs. So there's a lot of things we simply can't do in the space station now. And a lot of folks haven't caught on to that fact yet. But there's a real commercial opportunity for someone to solve that problem. I'll just touch upon this. This was really a beautiful idea. If you didn't want to change your initial booster, the beauty of this is you only build one new element, an airframe around, and you put it around a whole bunch of existing elements on the bottom, and you can build an entirely new architectural capability to satisfy 3 major classes of payloads: light, medium, and heavy. And you can literally have a whole new architecture based on the Atlas 3, and with greatly lowered costs. Elon Musk came up with the way to do it. Elon said, well, that airframe is pretty heavy. If you just size your rocket the right way, well, then you can size it to have enough propellant so you can land it vertically, which always seemed like a crazy idea to me, but obviously it's a great idea. Anyway, so moving on. I won't stay on this because Jay covered most of this. This is how we kind of reintroduced the Integrated Space Plan back in 2014. But Jay covered all that stuff. So this brings us up to today, where we have, today it's a whole new ball game than 20 years ago. We have a completed integrated or a completed International Space Station in orbit that's functional, but yet they, as soon as they completed it, they terminated the shuttle. So now we got a whole bunch of little guys, ballistic reentry capsules being made, and hopefully we'll get a high LORD vehicle, Sierra Nevada, eventually. We got a new way to get to orbit through a new mechanism called CAISPN, which is a specialized 501c3. But CAISPN is allowing new opportunities for the private sector to get to and do work on the space station. We've got NASA trying to grapple with a whole new way of doing business in space. We've got aerospace companies that are developing a whole suite of new launch systems. We've got new contractual mechanisms that didn't exist 10 years ago. The COTS, Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, and the ISS Cargo Resupply Service. Those contractual mechanisms were the mechanisms that we used to build the CST-100 and the Dragon, and those are probably going to be very applicable for future programs, which will greatly lower costs, which we must do because we got customers demanding lower cost access, and we got guys like Musk coming along and greatly reducing launch costs by 60, 70, 80%. So things are in transition right now in a big way, and now NASA is beginning to think about, they're beginning to relook at lunar and Mars architectures, and they want to get the private sector involved, and they're trying to find ways to do that and identify niches for the private sector to get involved. So that's beginning to happen now, and then here comes our integrated space plan. So the integrated space plan is meant to be, we're trying to bring it into the internet age. The ISP, my vision of it was always to have it, always to use it to help create a global vision for the space program, and use it as a consensus to develop, our long-range objectives in space. And that's something that we can do now that we can make it available on the internet to everybody around the world. So this is a major, this is a significant step forward over where it was 20 years ago. We also want to use it. We think it's particularly applicable for kind of showing the private sector, giving them insights into what they can do in orbit, and hopefully our database is going to be a kind of the place to go to get information on all these elements and things in space. So our next steps. So we're now online. We're looking for an army of geeks to help develop the database, and so anybody out there that wants to help us fill in a lot of the data behind the blocks, please get with Jay or Gary, and we'll integrate you, make you part of the team. We are now accepting and we are now receiving feedback from the global community on the space plan. The database is in work. This next year or two, we're going to focus on cislunar architecture, getting back to the moon, onto Mars, trying to figure out how to integrate the 3D additive manufacturing into facilities in high Earth orbit and the moon. So that'll be the next version of the ISP. Will see some more emphasis in those areas. I'm not sure if Jay touched upon this or not, but in the near future we want to start pulling together an advisory board of visionaries to kind of help us assess the inputs that we get and guide the development of the long-range vision. And we want to use that vision to pinpoint prospective commercial opportunities for the private sector. So hopefully, sometime in the next year, we want to come out with version 6, and hopefully everybody will be happy with that. So in retrospect, after many years of after living through this, actually, I can say a few things for certain. It's really impossible to predict the future unless you're a psychic. Back in 1990, the ISP had us landing on Mars in the year 2016. Well, take it back. We're actually going to Phobos, but that was the precursor Mars mission, was a manned mission of Phobos. We didn't quite make that. Well, we've also learned that space development is far too expensive to do it the way we did Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo. So it looks like contractual mechanisms have emerged to enable us to lower costs to do business in space. And one of the things, if you're young and you're entering the workforce and you go to work for one of the big companies, or even a company like SpaceX, of course you'll have even SpaceX is going to become a big company one day soon. But don't ever underestimate the difficulty of selling a good idea to an entrenched bureaucracy, because it can take years. I think all the time Buzz and I spent on Capitol Hill trying to educate the public and people in Washington about reusable flyback boosters. That was 16 years ago, and we're just now seeing them. So it takes time. And strategic change in large corporations happens at glacial speeds, and that's just about how long it takes. 16 years. And so it pays to be young, but you young guys got to remember that bringing future visions to fruition belongs to those who can persevere and stay working at it for many years. Like guys like Jay and I are getting gray hairs now doing this, but it's beginning to happen. And I think that's about all I have, except everybody run off to our site and buy t-shirts and coffee mugs. That's all. Questions? Oh, wait a minute, Gary. All right, so So Gary is our IT wizard who's actually managed to take the integrated space plan and put it on the internet and make it so anybody can go to it, zoom in on it, go dive into different elements. And by the way, we're just starting now with the diving into the elements. It's going to evolve a lot in the next couple of years. But at least now you can go to most of the major elements and see what they are if you have no idea what they are. Gary Bickford has been our chief our chief technical guy doing that kind of stuff, and I'll turn it over to Gary now. So I guess I gotta
Thanks, Ron.
unshare.
So thanks, Ron. So I will pick up where Jay and Ron left off. And so now you've heard how we got to where we are. So now the question is, where do we go from here? And I'll also ask, who is we? So where in 1989, space was basically NASA and the Soviet space program, and the planning was all top-down. Space is now an ecosystem. There are thousands of players involved, each with their own objectives. An ecosystem is not a top-down plan. It follows the light, and it grows toward the light. Today's space initiatives are based on partnerships, alliances, and mutual self-interest, and I think a little vision. The overall goal is the same, moving humans and the life of Earth into the solar system and possibly beyond. Plans today are dynamic, cooperative, adaptive, and must be more easily justified under various criteria, often including financial reward, as opposed to political reward, I might note. In this context, I should note this image is only suggestive of some of the things we'll be doing. The content in it is not related to space at all. I borrowed it from somebody else. But it does represent two things: the dynamic structure of space planning today, which is no longer top-down, but adapting to new goals, new technologies, and new players as we go along. It's also an example of a force diagram, which is among the visualization tools we will be supporting. So who are we? Today's space community, if you will, has several major categories of components. We have companies who are working for NASA or working for their own. We have Virgin Galactic. We have SpaceX. We have Planetary Resources. We have, so these are all these companies all have the need to share data so that we can work toward a common goal. At this point, it's like any startup environment. If you want to expand the market, you work together in cooperation as well as competition. So those companies need tools for market analysis and strategic planning. The agencies not only need to know what's going on in technology and what companies can do what their capabilities are, what's coming down the pipe. They need to be able to publish their research, to reach out to the community, educate the public, and assist the industry. Industry support is a two-way street. The companies that support NASA, NASA supports the companies, and we all support the process. There are many, many non-governmental organizations, such as National Space Society, the Space Foundation, Space Frontier Foundation, the Planetary Society, hundreds of others. These agencies, these organizations, perform advocacy, they evaluate alternatives, they publish quite often very technical reports. People take a lot of volunteer time to generate valuable data and valuable information about space, which is used both by the agencies and the companies, but also by the public and the politicians. The public is now much more involved, I believe, in space, at least some of the public. From my own surveys, casual surveys, you look at the number of people who grew up with with Star Trek, Star Wars, and all of the other future and space fiction, and they've come to accept the idea in the movies, like Interstellar, and what was the one with Sandra Bullock? I don't remember what it's called right now. So the public, I believe, at least a percentage of them, are much more involved in accepting of the idea that space is no longer just a fantasy, no longer just fiction and for some weirdos.
Gravity.
Something that, pardon me?
The film's name is Gravity.
That's it. Thank you. So today, space is a regular part of everybody's lives, with GPS, with the weather, and so forth. And of course, one of the most important parts for us are the volunteers and volunteer organizations who want to contribute to the process of providing a platform and a planning tool for the entire community. We've developed partnerships to work on particular areas of the space plan. For lunar development, the organization Waypaver wants to help us assure the quality of the data for all of the lunar development parts of the space plan. We're just starting to work on a plan for providing K-12 and academic outreach and education and research. We have a partnership with Kinematic, who did the recent supercut of the SpaceX first stage coming back down and landing on the barge a few weeks ago, or 2 months ago. And for Mars development, we're looking for a group who would like to take the responsibility for making sure that we have all the components for Mars development and for getting to Mars brought into our system and with the accurate and reliable content. And of course, there's lots of work for data quality, contributions, curation, and that kind of thing. This should really be several slides, but I'll just run through these a little bit. So this is what we're trying to do. From originally doing just a plan, we realized that a plan is dependent on accurate data, accurate resources. We need to know how long a particular technology will take to get to fruition. How long will it take to get a fission, nuclear thermal rocket, or an ion propulsion system? There's a dozen different ion propulsion technologies. Which ones will be most useful for particular applications? So we've expanded the objective from just doing plans to providing a platform for collecting information, analyzing it, and presenting it in ways that are useful for across the industry. So we've automated quite a bit of data collection. We'll be continuing to do that. We have automated filtering. We're also supporting, obviously, individual contributions of curated content, and we have some contributors now who are working on particular areas, which I won't get into any details about that. But if you have a particular expertise, as we've said a couple of times already, we'd welcome your contribution. I'm going to spend a moment here on this next line, the linked data, semantic web, and big data. So these are technologies that we're using to build the system. And I will show us a couple of slides later that will give some visual understanding of that. The semantic web was invented by Tim Berners-Lee, who was the original inventor of the World Wide Web. He realized in the late 90s that it's the linkages between different web pages, different content on the web, is based on manual connections rather than based on the meaning of content. So he developed a system that allows both individuals and machines to navigate across the linkages based on meaning. One way that's used now is many websites have semantic tagging hidden in the web pages that you look at that tell Google what kind of data that it's looking at. For instance, if there's an email address, Google knows now that that's an email address. if it's a company name, Google, you can tell Google that this is a company name, or it's a person, or it's a description. So that's the kind of things that semantic web provides. Is it provides much more powerful connection between things based on meaning of what you're working with. I think many people have heard the term big data. It's sort of a catch-all for a lot of things. Our system will eventually be much larger than almost any available database 20, 30 years ago. We'll get into that a little more later, but basically it's collecting a lot of data and providing connections between it all so that you can navigate through it relatively easily. And as I said, I'll talk about the linked data a little bit more later. So that's the overall kind of approach to the way that we're doing things and the capabilities that we're building. So then some of these objectives are supporting education and community from K-12 to academic, as I mentioned. You saw one example of a visualization system. We'll be showing a few others that we're working on. There are literally many, many ways to visualize data these days that will make it much easier to understand what's going on. You've seen some of those things in TV programs and so forth, and we can't show you too many right now, but we'll also have a set of tools for researchers and analysts to build visualizations based on their research in our data and across the multiple servers. And similarly, companies or NGOs or individuals will be able to both construct and evaluate scenarios and roadmaps. For instance, if you want to build a habitat on the moon, with our system, we hope that you will be able to collect all of the tools that are needed, the prerequisites for getting to for building your systems. That you need rocket engines, you need life support systems, you need to be able to build a habitat on the enclosures on the moon and so forth. And so with our system, you'll be able to know when those capabilities, the technologies, have been are ready for actual use in the real world. And we'll talk really briefly later about some of the new apps using this shared data. So we're collecting data from all over the place, from governmental data sets, from private data sets, from shared linked open data, using the semantic web and the linked data technologies. We're no longer limited to data that's on one system. And we'll talk about that a little more in a little bit. But if you think about the idea of sharing data among computer systems, among companies, that's a very powerful tool. For instance, if someone at SpaceX wants to evaluate a component for their new rockets, NASA may have some technological data about it. Another company may have the actual design documents. Our system may have the projected capabilities. Using data from various places where you used to have to collect that data yourself and go and navigate all these different websites and search and collect the data and so forth. Once we have this stuff in our system, you can basically query it in one system, which would be ours, of course, and it will be pulled live if necessary, or recently updated depending on the situation, or archival data according to your requirements, and you can get it all from one place. And on the right, you just have some examples of some of the kinds of things which I won't go through right now. And using this system, you will also be able to publish and share data with your partners and with other researchers. So these are just a few of the government data sets. The defense has video and imagery. I didn't list it here, but NASA has. We already have incorporated the NASA facilities data set into our system. We pulled some data from the master catalog of archival material. The U.S. government has an entire archive of data from census and economics and so forth. The SEC data set has every filing by every publicly held company. So if you want to know what Boeing has been doing, that data is available. I don't know that we'll be bringing that into our system in the short term, but we may be pulling some of that from some of the other analytics companies that actually do filter that data and provide useful data about that. We also get data from other places. DBpedia is a subset of Wikipedia using this semantic web linked data approach. Now, I mentioned linked data earlier. The image on the right here is an example of the concept of linked data. In the center, you have DBpedia. It has links going in and out. It's sending, it's collecting data from the U.S. Census. It's got an interaction with the GeoNames database. These are all other systems maintained by other people than the DBpedia people. FOAF is short for friend of a friend. That's a database that any person can register for free and register information about themselves and decide which parts are public and so forth. So that's a database of people. And DBpedia can access that, and so if you are a component, or like if you're the chairman of SpaceX, DBpedia can, knows that you're an employee at SpaceX and can look up friend of a friend to find out other linkages about you. Down here you have Project Gutenberg, which publishes open source text. They scan and OCR out-of-print books. So these are just a few examples of how things across the internet can be connected together using this linked data approach. And RDF, short, over here we see RDF, that's short for Resource Description Format, which is the fundamental method for or format. It's not quite a format, but there are a number of different formats of RDF for connecting all these things together. Each of these linkages is essentially a sentence which you can express, like DBpedia writes to GeoNames. DBpedia collects data from U.S. Census. So there's a subject, a predicate, and object, and that's what all that RDF means. That is a sentence about things. It's a fact. So we're collecting many, many, many facts. So this is an illustration of some of the stuff we're doing now. We already have the we've already generated linked data about each of the nodes in the ISP and other things in the system. We're in the process of pulling in the NASA database about the 7,437 spacecraft that are known to have been launched into orbit, going back to 1957. That will be a part of our system. That's actually almost 100,000 data points. We have already pulled in the NASA facilities, so we have the contact information and telephone numbers in many cases of every facility at every NASA site. For instance, the high vacuum research facility in Bakersfield is one of them in there, and you can look up in our system at who's in charge of it this month and what's their phone number. I believe that the phone number of that one is actually in there. They're not. So our goal is to have 5 million data points this year, and I fully expect that to multiply by a factor of 10 every year from here on out. And on the right here, this illustration shows you just a piece of how this stuff connects together. In the middle, you have a taxonomical term, which I'll get into taxonomies in it. Basically, launch vehicle. What is a launch vehicle? That's what a taxonomy and our ontological term is. So that term, launch vehicle, is tied to many, many, many actual launch vehicles. And you can see, I don't know if it's visible on your screens, you can see each of these lines from that says either see also or is related to. There's some other terms here too. So up here you have, up on the right, this link is actually a DBpedia link. So the blue one is a link in our system. which refers to the DBpedia link about launch vehicles, which in turn links to other things. Each of these little circles is another reference. Our system also links to each of the individual items on the ISP, the reusable Falcon Heavy, the Angara 5, the Atlas 5, the Ariane 5, Proton M, Orion Test Flight, and Long March 3. So here you can see how, as you look at any entity in the system, you can navigate through the system following these links to find out more about things that are related to it. And we'll get into a little bit more of that in a minute. One of the classic visualizations, we mentioned we're going to have a lot of different visualizations, and Jay talked about this. We intend to have the ability to construct quad charts about projects in development. In many cases, I'm not sure that they're necessary for things that have been built for 10 years. But certainly, as we develop the data, in fact, we'll be looking for some expert advice in what data needs to be included in automatically generated quad charts. And on the right here, just as an illustration, this is an example of how linked data can be used. Here we have a chess group, and then one of the arrows is a label as members, and over here you have Alice. Her age is 18. She is a member since 2005 of the chess group. And also, there's two arrows here between Alice and Bob. Bob knows Alice, and Alice knows Bob. So this shows you how these sentences put together, you can use queries that are very similar to database queries, SQL, and so forth, but we'll be providing much easier user interfaces for that. But anyway, so the quad charts is just one example of visualization. Another would be PERT charts. So if you are developing your development on the moon, you should be able to develop a PERT chart based on the boxes that are relevant to that project. There are other advanced visualizations. This happens to be what's called an alluvial diagram. It's designed to show flow of different items from one end to the other. We'll be replacing this one, which is this diagram, with the one that actually refers to projects in space. I just borrowed it. I don't even remember what the original topic was. I believe this is about energy flow. This could be a timeline, but this is just an example of some of the types of visualizations that we can do with the same data depending on the needs of the researcher or the analyst. Here's another visualization, really very similar to the earlier one. This shows you here. In the middle you see NASA. This is in our system. Each of these little dots is a pointer to another piece of data or multiple pieces of data. In this case, we're just showing a subset that shows that these relations are sentences. So NASA is an organization based in Washington, D.C. It was established in 1958. It was its successor to the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, NACA. The head of NASA is Charles Bolden, and his deputy is Dava Newman. So as you can see, there are many more pieces of data, but this just shows you how all this stuff fits together. One of the key factors in making this stuff work, in generating a plan that is usable across the industry, people have different meanings for different things. So we are working on ontologies. NASA and JPL both have several ontologies. There are many, many different ontologies. I'll just quote here. An ontology is a representation of entities, ideas, and events, along with their properties and relations, according to a system of categories. If you remember from your high school days, the taxonomy of life, you start off with things that live, then you have plants and animals, then you have mammals and reptiles. That's a tree structure, and that's a taxonomy. And ontologies are more formal, and they're not a tree necessarily. They're a set of trees. Over on the right, in this illustration shows the JPL suite ontology, each of these boxes is a separate ontology, but they're classed into groups. Everything, a material thing, they're all in this yellow box, says material thing. If you drill down in there, you see manufactured thing. And in manufactured thing, you have vehicles. And in vehicles, you have flying vehicles. And in flying vehicles, you have spacecraft. And then under spacecraft, then you can start getting into what kinds of spacecraft. So and over here you have living thing, which goes into the whole taxonomy of life. So this is not, we are using this ontology among others. We have our own that we're building, and we'll be providing mappings between different definitions of things so that when somebody's doing research, they'll have a way to connect things that don't necessarily use the same terminology. Again, this is all in service of generating plans. So for researchers, using the tools that we'll be providing, a researcher will be able to extract data according to requirements from our data set and combine with data from multiple other sources. We showed you examples of a combined visualization of data about the launch vehicles from our data set and from the DBpedia web data set. We could have included something from the NASA facilities, but I don't think we had it up at that time. So we could have said, well, a launch vehicle came from Cape Canaveral, Pad 7. I don't remember if there's a Pad 7, but you get the idea. So using this collection of data, instead of having, and of course, instead of having to go and dive into all the dozens and dozens of different websites and different resources, they will be more and more capable of pulling that data through our system. And if there's somebody who needs data from someplace and it's public, or if we can arrange access to it, they can tell us about it. Then, so one person will extract it, and then once we know about it, we can pull it into our system quite often. So then, any follow-on researchers, the data will already be there. So then, after they do their analysis and do their whatever kind of research they're doing, comparing the old technologies and so forth, then they can publish their results in scientific journals or to their management in the company and so forth. And as part of that peer review process, they will, we hope, be able to add their data into the shared environment for peer review and archival. So it'll be available easily from here on. Now it's possible that some companies may want to use the data and and maintain a proprietary result. In that case, I feel personally that it's fair that they should be willing to pay a fee for that. We don't have a policy at this point, but I would say that that would be the case. But if they want to publish it freely, then that's a different scenario. Actually, let me go back. I would just note, we mentioned crowdsourcing here. Everybody in this audience and in the ISDC audience is a candidate to provide support for this system by contributing information, finding data that you believe we need to include in the system, curating the data that we have, fixing errors. There's lots and lots of things to do. We need back-end support as well. And experts in semantic technologies, domain experts in aerospace. So no matter what your skill level, if you want to contribute to building the ecosystem plan for space, we welcome your support. I mentioned linked data applications earlier. So we've all used spreadsheets and we've drawn graphics and so forth. We use a file system on our computer. There are now tools available for this internet-wide shared data model based on linked data that allows you to do those same things and more. These are just some examples. You can generate a spreadsheet in which the data in different columns is from different servers, or is from a filtered expression from different servers. So those are the kinds of capabilities that you no longer have to manually combine those things. At least that's our objective. Now, I'm not saying we have this running now. Some of these tools exist, but we have not incorporated them in the system. I just don't want to have people saying we're ready to go tomorrow. I mentioned Sparkle here because many people are familiar with SQL, the database language. Sparkle is designed to work, or to be at least somewhat familiar to those who've used SQL. We'll be putting a lot of the heavy lifting of Sparkle under the covers, so all you have to do is push buttons in many cases. But for advanced researchers, they'll want to be able to run their own complex Sparkle queries, and we will be able to support that. I think it may require a subscription for that, though, because some Sparkle queries can run for hours or days. So as a result of that, you'll have no more constraints to the data that's on your own system. No more looking for the data down and then converting it, from one method format to another. It'll all be in one format because we've already done the conversion. And this way you can provide data to others. For instance, if you have a Sparkle query that generates really good data, then you can publish that Sparkle query, and if people have access, then they'll be able to run that query and get the same result. We might be able to cache many of those queries. I think we'll be running and caching many standardized queries so the data will just always be there immediately instead of running a large database operation. So we need you. We need lots of people. If you're a space company, we will have a reference node for every company involved in space, and for many products within those companies. We encourage companies to contribute data about their technology, their products, to the extent that that's not proprietary and not pure marketing. That's reference data, and we'll include it in the reference. If you want to partner with us and include a larger presence in our system, including banner presence or online brochures, catalogs, or other information, talk to us and we'll work something out. If you have, let's see, let's see, what slide is this? I have about 4 left, I think. Let's see, not even that. I got 2 more after this. So anyway, if you have an RSS feed about what's going on in your company, we can provide a block showing those feeds, the titles of the feeds. That goes also for journals, blogs, magazines, other publications. We'll have a reference node for every one of them, and if you have an RSS feed, some magazines have like a dozen RSS feeds. I don't think we'll have all of them. But we already provide RSS feeds of NASA and ESA, and we can provide more of those in our system. We believe it's useful to have those for people who are on the website so they can quickly find out what's going on in all these different places. And going the other way, because of the linked data model and the open source, much of this data can be incorporated into your published content. We've talked about agencies already, and I'll just make this fairly quick here. We get a lot of our data from NASA at this point, and we hope to get more from other people as well, but that's certainly one of our most reliable and largest volume. NASA has huge amounts of research data from the 70s and 80s that we intend to incorporate into the system as time goes on. We've already used some of that in some of the ISP elements. We would like to work with agencies to outreach to the public and for other purposes. And of course, we can do research projects using the system. And I've mentioned volunteers, I won't go into that anymore. A waypaver is an example of an organic group. If you have a group with expertise in a particular area, we can delegate responsibility for that subject to our oversight, which will give you the ability to produce data and not publish it until you're all ready and until everybody's ready to say, okay, we're going to release it outside the group. So we have a long way to go to get to Mars, but we are all going to get into space one way or another. There are 1,000 different space plans. Everybody, I think, involved in space or interested in space has their own plan. We intend to provide the broad, fundamental, technical, financial, and economic data required to achieve these plans and to evaluate these plans. And our intention is for our data to be as reliable and correct as possible. So with that, I think that is my last slide, and I think I'm done.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll move on to the Q&A session. For those of you in the audience who are watching us on YouTube, you please use the Q&A function on the Google Hangout to submit questions to the panel. Mr. Wittner, I understand you have to go shortly, so let's line you up first here. I have a couple questions for you specifically related to your presentation.
Hey, Ethan?
Yeah, go ahead.
I actually can stay up until 10 o'clock. I was just worried about having enough time for the Q&A for everyone.
Okay.
I do have like a 4-minute wrap-up. Would it be okay to do that, or do you want to save that time for the Q&A?
Actually, go ahead and do the 4-minute wrap-up. This call wraps up at 9:45 p.m. Eastern, so we've got plenty of time here to handle.
Okay, so let me go ahead and wrap this thing up, and then we can shift into the Q&A phase of everything. So, for listeners to this, either live or in the future, many of us have been waiting an awful long time for the same set of conditions to happen. Launch costs to be lower, reusability to happen, private industry to get engaged, new places to go that are affordable, and maybe fundamentally to get out of the clock speed of Congress and get into the clock speed of private industry. Anybody that's been paying attention to the news realizes that stuff we've been waiting 20 years for has finally happened, which is very exciting. Actually this morning, SpaceX landed on the drone ship again. We have Blue Origin, multiple flights with the same vehicle, stuff people that said has been impossible for 20 years, a lot of people have been claiming. We have the beam at the International Space Station, and last month, Bickford Aerospace and ULA announced that they are going to be launching a V330 into orbit in 2020. That what we've been waiting for is finally starting to happen. We are going to work to building the future, and we invite listeners to contact us and work with us because our time is finally coming. We need a lot of help. Gary talked about this before. There's a lot of tasks that we need help with. We're 4 people, and all of us have other responsibilities besides integrated space analytics. We want this thing to move forward rapidly, but more importantly, it has to. It's critical for the overall operation of our space future. So if you want to get involved, let us know. There's openings to engage with us. We want to do that. As I don't remember if it was Gary or Ron mentioned, but we do want to have an advisory board. This is not heavy lifting. This is experts that we can call on periodically with questions as we're updating different sectors of the Integrated Space Plan. If you know somebody like that, or if you are somebody like that, whatever your area of expertise is, let us know. We want there's a way for you to get engaged without spending a huge amount of time as well. We are getting into a period of our development where we're going to be putting forth marketing partnerships. So you can put your brand up with us on our poster, on our website. You can get a bold listing, and whether you're a nonprofit or for-profit organization, you can have a page on our website that talks about what you do and have access to our leadership team on a regular basis, so you have some input on where the space plan goes in the future. We're offering this for $750 or $65 a month. This is great exposure for your company and positions you as one of the leaders in the industry that you're obviously engaged with everything. Another way to engage is to provide the integrated space plan to more places. We have people that are calling us to say, please, please, please send us the integrated space plan, but we can't afford to send them out for nothing, and some people are asking us for that. If you want to provide ISPs to like high schools in your area or something, we have packages. You buy group amounts of ISPs for a lower amount and distribute them in your area. And if you want to do it on a larger scale, we can even brand an ISP for your organization with appropriate volume. We've recently formed some strategic partnerships that were mentioned. Kinematic makes videos. I think that the video they made most recently about the Falcon 9 is up to like 500,000 views already, which is awesome. We were approached by Waypaver Foundation that they'd like to work with us in terms of lunar architecture and removing obstacles to lunar development. We've been starting to do strategic partnerships. We're going to do more at ISDC. If you're with an organization and you want to work with us, give me a call. Let's talk about it. We realize the need for that. And that takes us into the questions, except at ISDC, we're going to be there for the whole conference, starting, I believe it's on the 18th of May. Call me. That's my cell phone number right there on the slide. Make arrangements. Have a beer with me. Sit down with Gary and Ron and I. Talk about what you're doing. We're planning to have a lot of meals at this Choices restaurant at the hotel. If you don't have an appointment and it's lunchtime, come look for us. If it's dinner time, come look for us. Also, we will have an exhibit table at the conference, so quite often one of us will be at the exhibit table during the exhibit hours for people that want to get together. And that's my contact information. I'll leave that up for a minute or two in case anybody wants to jot that down. Thanks for the extra time, Ethan. That's it for the whole presentation. And we can now do whatever Q&A you have or everyone else too.
All right, thank you. Jay, I kind of want to ask you first off a philosophical question in regards to the integrated space plan. There's kind of a versus about how do you make what you cited as how do you make liberalized frontiership happen versus space being settled by either a bureaucracy or specific organization. You cited the American West wasn't settled until homesteaders just simply went out and did it. And the difference between what they faced then and what we face today is the fact that to settle the American West didn't take much in terms of specialized skill or technology, but nowadays space travel itself is a very specialized takes a lot of specialized skill set or otherwise. How do we jump that skill gap and make these skills, these technologies available to the public for relatively low cost of entry in terms of training and in terms of material assets so that we can see this space homesteading happen? What do you see in your view?
Well, I think that many of us would probably agree. This is no brilliant insight on my part, but the lowering of launch costs, I think, is the fundamental barrier to doing everything with more people, more organizations getting involved. We're already seeing tremendous drops in the cost of space access compared to what things were with the space shuttle and also with the legacy vehicles from the lead aerospace firms. That, they have a lot of infrastructure that is a bit dated and there's an extra cost that's tied up in all that. So I think that reduction in cost is a big key. And also I think that things will move forward more rapidly if people are working more collectively toward objectives, because otherwise there's a lot of wasted effort. I'll give you an extreme example that I'm making up on the spot. Like if let's say that 5% of the space community was pushing for a base on Pluto right now. Mm-hmm. Well, to me, that's all like wasted energy because we're not ready to put a base on Pluto right now. So those energies would be better served towards something that's more near-term and ripe as opposed to something that's too far off in the future. So I think that by having an integrated space plan, hopefully over time we'll get more and more input and engagement from the community, And the ISP in the long run will move from being the vision of the 4 members of our team and the 10 or 15 other people that we've really worked with rather closely in putting it together to the vision of the community at large, at which point it'll be a very powerful thing.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think Jay touches on a very important point, and part of my motivation in being involved in this, I'm very much into reality. There's a lot of roadmaps out there that say we're going to go this and we want to do that and we need to do this, but if you have reliable data about ion propulsion, about the Vassimer, if we have the best available data about how far along that project is and what's a reasonably good prediction of when that will be available in a production environment and what it will take to get there. If you know for each element of your plan what the time frames are, what the probabilities of success are, and whether it will work for what you are doing, then you can take your roadmap and you can test it against the realities, so that it's no longer just hand-waving.
All right, now here's kind of the clincher that a couple friends and I joke about. At what point do I not need a PhD to go into space? At what point do I, if you can give me the idiot's kit, quote unquote, the idiot's kit to space survival, put me in a spaceship and send me to Pluto to build that base, at what point does it become so, if you will, so simple that even anyone could do it?
Ethan, you don't need a PhD. All you need is like $15 million.
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing, because Jay, you said the reduction of launch cost is going to enable people to go to space, but then that just only reduces the financial barrier. But then what about the skill barrier then? If space requires that much technical knowledge to do it, at what point does it become simplified or ready-made? I mean, Gary, you spoke of when you write code, you don't necessarily write code from raw. You just borrow someone else's module, plug it in, and you're good to go. So where does that happen here in terms of space hardware and tech?
Well, I think that what Ron just said a moment ago, you have $15 million, you can go to space as a space tourist, that's probably a true statement in the near term, that some number like that works. But with the advances that we're seeing from SpaceX and Blue Origin and the lower prices, proposed by like the Vulcan rocket that is being developed by ULA, and then Ariane 6 and these other things, price is going to keep going down, partly because of the actions of SpaceX. That's pulling down all the prices and making people strive for new things. So soon it won't cost $15 million to be a space tourist. It'll be costing dramatically less money, and that's going to open up the venue for many more people. I mean, when you go to be a tourist, you don't need to have a PhD. I recently took a cruise. I'm not a sailor. I don't have any specialized knowledge, but I have a Visa card. And I think that over time, the space adventure tourism, for lack of a better term, is going to be more and more affordable.
Yeah.
But it's never going to be easy, Ethan. Space is inherently risky. People are going to die. And so I think there's always going to be a certain, there's always going to be risk. And space belongs to those who can adapt and be smart enough and wise enough to understand the risks so they can survive in a very harsh environment.
Imagine if you're born, just going far ahead, if you're a baby born in space on an orbital habitat, and you're getting to be at the terrible twos, and there are handles and doors that if you open that door, you kill everybody on the habitat. This is going, I believe, and this is very far into the future, I think. Well, maybe not that far. I believe that living in space is going to generate a cultural and eventually possibly genetic differences people who are willing to accept the fact that they are an inch from disaster, literally, or 6 inches, depending on the thickness of the shell. And so they have to be at the same time very careful, very good at planning, very methodical about everything they do, and knowing don't mess with anything you don't understand. So they're both risk takers because they're up there and living in this high risk environment, and they're methodical. They're not Evil Knievel. You will not. I don't think you'll see Evil Knievel in space anytime soon.
So,
But
Gary,
see
you've identified a new space company, child-proofing of space settlements. I haven't heard of that one before. It's a new industry you've invented right here on the spot.
If you ever, yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
If you ever seen the History Channel's special on sex in space, they essentially treat the problem as, if we're going to have us colonize space, we have to be able to reproduce in space. But now the second part after that is, how do you birth and how do you raise kids in space so that they don't kill themselves or kill you because Junior hit the airlock vent switch, wondering if it would dispense candy or not or something. You know.
That's very good. Yeah, and as a case in point, I think I had just remembered this. When my daughter was born, that was a long time ago, and we lived in a house with wood heat. And we had a wood stove right in the middle of the hallway in the center of the house. And before she was able to crawl, she was around that so she could feel the heat. So she experienced, oh, this is getting too hot, before she could crawl fast enough to get in trouble. So by the time she was walking, she was already trained not to walk into the fireplace or into the wood stove and not to run too close to it and so forth. So she learned very quickly that this is a dangerous spot. So people can learn early.
I see. Kind of going back to the questions earlier, because a lot of you cited the use case of the ISP going to the general public and to governments. And my question there is, what are the use cases you guys see? I mean, what does a politician in, say, Montana want to do with the ISP, and how are they going to use it, for example, versus someone who a governor in Florida where he's obviously involved in the Space Coast or otherwise?
Well, I think that the political class, for the most part, is not interested in space about space. They're interested in jobs. They're interested in dollars in their districts. So for a lot of those people, looking at the integrated space plan would be like, well, okay, what's happening in space soon that some businesses in my district maybe could play a role in? You know, what can we do as a state to attract some of these things to our state? But as if you don't have any background in space and what's happening, how would you know what kind of things would be likely to be coming in the near future? So the Integrated Space Plan is a tool that the different municipalities and state governments can use in thinking about planning about, like, where can they have a role. And one thing that I've always been annoyed by is when money, they want money to be spent in their district, and that's all they care about. Well, okay, well, by God, spend it on something that makes sense. You know, if we're going to spend $100 million a year in your district, instead of it being on some foolish space thing, that if you're an integrated space plan follower, that you see, well, you know, I don't see any element about that anywhere. You know, what is this project for the $100 million? I don't really think that in many cases they would care if the $100 million was spent on something that was actually useful. You know, their main thing is the money be spent on their district. So that maybe it could be a guide to spending the money in areas where it's actually beneficial, as opposed to just spending money around for things that aren't really urgent or timely.
Speaking of Montana, have you ever run into a gentleman from High Frontier Space Company? He's building a lander called Laramie Rose. So I realized Montana was probably not exactly a very distant example from the space program, but all go ahead.
I was going to add to that, for both the politicians and the companies, something I probably should have brought up is I considered putting use cases into my talk originally, and I haven't done it at this point.
Yeah.
If you're a company that builds, left-handed widgets, if you look at of a particular kind, your company owns a particular technology, you can look at the space plan and say, oh, okay, in 7 years, this project that's going to be coming up in about 7 years is going to need my technology. And so then I can plan my development process for future marketing purposes based on the needs that I see in the future for people doing whatever.
Yeah.
So it allows companies to use this for strategic planning, and that applies to the politicians as well.
Yeah. So basically this goes to what we cited about economic development initiatives by government needing the ISP to decide what do we want to invest in based on rising tech sectors or otherwise. Gary, you'd cited about the example of Silicon Valley, that as the computer industry rose, people had to develop supply chain or support industry in that region to support Silicon Valley and the dynamic there, but to try to replicate that in other locales was the main difficulty, because the assumption was if you just build this, it will come, or that the second wave is going to come anyway without understanding how did the first wave come about.
Sure. And going back to the ecosystem model, if you look at the taxonomy of life that I mentioned earlier, the evolutionary tree, there are a lot of branches of that evolutionary tree that never happened, that they died out, or there's one representative now. So that's true of the ecosystem that we have. I've mentioned ion propulsion. Like there's a dozen different forms of that. Some of those are not going to succeed. So it may be that by working through this, looking at the plan and the content and the information about each of these nodes, you may be able to say, oh, you know what, this ion propulsion thing that this guy wants us to invest in is not going to happen because this one's better.
Yeah. Okay.
Now that may not be a good thing for the guy who invented it, or promoting it, but that is part of the ecosystem.
Do other industries use integrated plans similar to this? Because this is very aerospace centric, but do other industries have similar roadmaps for how they're going to plan out what tech they develop or when they launch product or where?
Companies do that, and I think highly regulated companies or industries tend to have government involvement like that to some extent. I think to some extent this is pretty unique, and this is sort of a unique requirement. A lot of this has been sort of ad hoc. People in the Silicon Valley, electrical engineering, evolved into integrated circuits, and so there was a lot of this going on, but I don't think there was any formal industry-wide version of that in any of the technologies that I'm aware of offhand. Construction companies use the CP, critical path method, and the PERT charting. I forget what PERT stands for, to make sure that when you're building a high-rise, that the wiring on the 47th floor is put in before the drywall guy leaves the 41st floor. And that's you see these buildings going up. That's all planned in advance. It's just in time is another example of that, the supply chain process. So I think what we're doing is you could view it as a kind of combined technology supply chain. That's not a bad analogy.
Yeah.
Well, another angle on it, Ethan, I think, and from what I'm about to say, you'll understand why I don't know for sure, but I think in many industries, the giant companies may have their own internal version of what they see the long-term future of their industry being, but they view that as proprietary information that gives them an advantage, that they are planning out what's coming and they're making the right moves now for 5 or 10 years down the road, and they don't share it with anybody, would be my guess in some cases. We want to share it with everybody because we think by sharing it with everybody will be more efficient, people will be more on the same page, people will be doing the right projects, the right tasks, the right efforts at the right time. We don't have a profit motive to keep the ISP to ourselves. We want to share it with everybody because we think it'll be helpful.
Yeah.
and from my own history in Silicon Valley and high tech, when I was first started doing high tech, it was at that time you could not patent software, and a lot of the technology that the present Silicon Valley is based on was widely shared because it was a startup environment. There were no dominant players. There were no monopoly players in that market. And so I think to an extent we're in a window of opportunity right now where we can establish this idea of a common information base that everybody's using that is shared before any of the dominant players really take over this new paradigm of commercial space.
So basically, if you will, because kind of rewinding from Jay and going to you, Gary. Jay, you spoke of the caution of large organizations essentially having their self-interest or their specific aims, saying this is how we're going to go to space, but this is all internal to us, and that results in a lot of siloing or a lot of missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And Gary, you and I, in our prior discussion about who buys this space program, the two opportunities that exist are, one, governments looking to do economic development, corporations looking to do strategization. But now, Jay, from what you're saying, the third opportunity is identifying business opportunities. When does company A want to sell product to company B because it fits their strategy, and when does this create a valuable business opportunity? And then I apologize, Gary, because I forgot the point you said, and I wanted to respond to something you did say earlier, but it'll come back to me.
Well, I'd like to bring Ron in. He was involved at Rockwell and at Martin Marietta back in, you might say, the glory days when everybody was working for NASA. And maybe, I suspect there was less of the, the companies were, I think, were they used to working with each other more at that time than they are now? I mean, now they're all one company in a sense, but I wonder, was that similar to the Silicon Valley situation?
No, there was a lot of competition. They didn't really work together.
They didn't?
No. And, well, of course, now they work together because there's been so much, they buy each other up, Yeah, now they just all own. There's only 3 major aerospace companies now because they bought up all the rest. And that destruction of competition has really hurt us. That's why, and it just took a long time for Elon Musk, for SpaceX to happen, and put us back 20 years. But I don't know why people don't see this in government, but really all this consolidation hasn't been good for it was very bad in aerospace. Yeah, and getting back to the previous discussion about the integrated space plan and businesses, yeah, businesses do long-range planning, but the integrated space plan was an attempt to characterize a systematic overview of an entire industry, or is much more than a business. I mean, yeah. We're looking at a picture of an overall universe of activity. Now, what it'll cause is some of the old the old traditional companies like Lockheed and Grumman and Boeing to survive in the environment of the future that they can now look at. It's going to require strategic, changing their strategic plans. I'll tell you right now, companies like Lockheed have no idea what they're going to do in the era of the integrated space plan and commercial use of space. I mean, they've got a standard strategy that they're going by, and yeah, in some places their strategy can fit in, but there's a whole plethora of new things that they could do, which are going to require a lot of rethinking. Instead of just building vehicles in the future, and for the government, they may have to build them and operate them, or it's a whole new game. with the way the government wants to be operating. Just buying services. So yeah, things are changing. Big companies will be re-strategizing, and hopefully the ISP will maybe give them insights and help them do that.
I think I think it was you, Ron, that once told me that that space is only about 5% of Boeing's total revenue.
Yeah, it's probably less than that. Yeah,
So,
aerospace is like 2% space and 98% aero. Most of Boeing's money comes from commercial and military jets.
yeah.
Not what we do on our little contract with the ISS and CST 100. Those are really peanuts.
Well, one company that's sort of one of my favorites, because I talked to them 3 or 4 years ago at the very early days of the Space Finance Group, is a company called Planetary Systems. Not Planetary Resources, but Planetary Systems. And they build the connecting ring between stages. Instead of using explosives, this is a mechanical system. And it's been used on they've been building them now for 15 years, and they've been used on a number of smaller rockets. They don't get a lot of, nobody's ever heard of them. But once we have a note on our website, on our system, about them and what they make, that gives them the opportunity to be seen by somebody like Boeing or NASA or the North Korean Space Agency.
Oh, international cooperation. Here we come.
So, I'd love to see. We have somebody. By the way, we have a volunteer now. He's actually Finnish. He's from Finland, named Andrew Jones or Andrew Long. I can't remember right now. And he's a reporter for a news agency in Finland, and his beat is the Chinese space agencies. So we have him. He's voluntarily now curating the existing data we have on the Chinese space program, and we'll be adding new material over time that we'll be reviewing for inclusion in the system. And so that's just an example. Charlie Bolden even made recent sort of almost positive remarks about the Chinese and Americans cooperating. We have legal reasons why that can't be done right now, but I'm hoping that at least these folks will get together to talk about having the same standardized interfaces, like for the airlocks. If the Chinese station has the same kind of airlock as everybody else, then if something happens in space, there's a way to connect them together. Those are some simple things like that. It doesn't require, a top secret clearance to work those kind of things out. And I think that would be an area where, I don't know that the space plan itself could help with that. Maybe it could. But I'd love to see some, at least basic cooperation like that, of just some fundamentally important concepts.
Well, there
it's
are
like
certain
NPT. How do
areas where that works, where even competitors find it in their interest to cooperate. Like I guess it's been a few years now, but it's a relatively new organization, the Space Data Association. The different satellite operators share data on satellite positions, because even though they're in a pretty much dog-eat-dog competitive environment, they don't want their satellites running into the other guy's satellites, because that's bad for everybody. So there are certain cases where even tough competitors share data at various levels because it's better for everyone. And I think that's similar to what you were saying, Gary, to have like standardized airlocks or refueling things, just like if you have stereo equipment, you can plug different things into different things just because it's a different company made them. It's all designed to be compatible. I think that's a good thing for the long-term space infrastructure.
Gentlemen, we're coming up about on 8:45, but I'd like to ask one final question of the panel here. Ron Jones, in regards to what you said on your slide, lessons in retrospect for lessons 2 to 4, this is my current opinion and basis of my question. The thing is, The whole idea of lessons 2, 3, and 4, as I understood, is that how do you reduce the cost of space development and accelerate development pace? And my observation has been that risk is a very large factor on how companies make and organizations make the decision of what to develop, as well as what the speed and cost is going to be. And therefore, risk management and mitigation is very important to being able to revolutionize or even develop technologies or to make a more conservative approach. How do you, in your view, make risk management possible such that you can have the revolution that you envision from the examples of the external tank uses that you cited, or how do you allow risk management to happen so that a commercial space revolution that we're seeing, a democratized space market, how do you allow that to occur?
I think there's a lot of aspects to that. One of the big problems of the last 20 years, the whole idea of all the consolidation that's going on, that has happened. One way to eliminate risk is if you eliminate your competitors that force you to want to try new things. If you don't have anybody pushing you, you're just not going to do it. That solves the risk problem. And that, unfortunately, is a lot of what we've seen in the space program.
Governments cannot let people die.
Yeah, right. And when you have a space program that's run by the government, which it has been pretty much in the early days, you get what we got. But that's the exciting part of what's all changing now. If we can get a lot of commercial companies forcing, doing new and exciting things, not caring so much about risk. I mean, Elon Musk knows it's risky to go to Mars, but that's not going to stop him. So.
What was his quote? He said he plans to die on Mars, preferably not too quickly.
Right.
Not an impact, please.
And we got a lot of older guys running the traditional aerospace companies, and so I don't think there's going to be a lot of change there until it comes down to survival. When there's so many new upstarts taking away so much business in launch vehicle and in launching and in manufacturing, that's when they're going to change or they're going to die. I mean, Boeing just had its this year it's its 100-year anniversary.
Amazing.
And they're trying to figure out, are we going to be around in 200 years? And a lot of historians are weighing in, saying, well, very few companies ever make it that long. The odds are they won't be there. So Boeing's desperately
Walmart.
What?
There'd probably be a division of Walmart.
Yeah.
Walmart airplanes.
They're desperately trying now, looking at what's going on, trying to figure out, well, how is additive manufacturing going to change the way we do business? I mean, it's a major thing right now, and I'm sure they're going at some point they're going to be looking at what kind of strategic changes are we going to have to make in order to compete 10 years down the line in space. Making old expendable rockets is not going to fly much longer. So they're at the survival point now. So I think there will be some changes soon. But it's slow and doesn't happen until literally survival is at stake.
Yep.
I'd like to put it, just before we close, I'd like to put one just shout out to Ron and all the folks at the aerospace companies and at NASA and at these other places. I'm sure there are people who aren't in the category of space nuts, but every one of the NASA people I've met, every one of the people from Boeing and Intelsat, and all these companies, they're all space nuts, and they're all wanting to do this and make this happen. And NASA has done some amazing things with very little money, under the table almost. They have to follow the congressional mandates, but they found a way to support commercial space, in various ways. They've done some really pretty cool stuff to get this new space stuff going. and to effectively lower their own costs. So I have to say, kudos to all of those guys, including you, Ron.
Well, thank you, Gary.
All right, gentlemen, let us close tonight. This has been the 10th CAISPN call. I'm Ethan Chu hosting. This has been the Integrated Space Analytics team, Jay Wittner, Ron Jones, and Gary Bickford. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.